So that's something that I forgot, right? Thank you. All right. So
S- Sorry, I think we should mention that we would like to record this meeting, and if you have any concerns, then you're welcome to turn your cameras off.
thank you, Dennis. Yes, absolutely. Feel free to turn your cams off if you're not happy with being recorded. As I mentioned, the recording will be available on our project website as well. That's not being recorded because I forgot to start the recording. So I would like to once again offer our special thanks to British Council and our participants. And now we can make a start to the presentation. As you can see, our project itself is titled Inclusive and Social Justice-Oriented Pedagogies in language classrooms, insights from Turkey and Pakistan and the UK. So we have three different contexts in our project. Um, I'm not able to move between the slides. Good. Now you can see the flow of the presentation. So we'll make an overall start to the overview of the project, where I will be talking about the project. And then we will be talking about the theoretical background and the methodology of our research project. We will present the findings from teacher-educator interviews, and then we will move on to our overall findings, where we will be talking about the findings from learning teachers, which refer to the student teachers, and also the policy document analysis. At the end of the presentation, we will have a discussion and some suggestions or recommendations based on our outcomes. So let's start. That project, our inclusive and social justice-oriented pedagogies project, basically aims to investigate the integration of inclusive and social justice-oriented pedagogies in English language teaching by focusing on learning teachers. As I mentioned, learning teachers here refer to student teachers, teacher educators, and policy documents from three different and underrepresented contexts. These are, as I mentioned, Turkey, Pakistan, and Scotland in the UK context. Here you see our project website. Please feel free to, go and visit our project website after the, online event, if you like. There are resources available, the milestones of the project, a lot of, information and resources for everybody else who can benefit from those resources. Okay, so who are we? As the project team, and as you can see, we are a large project team. So we have people from Scotland, Pakistan, and Turkey. But let me once again mention that this project has been funded by the British Council. So we thank British Council for their immense support throughout the project. So from Scotland, as you can see, we have four people. So these include two people from the University of Stirling and two people from the University of Glasgow. So from the University of Glasgow, we have Deniz Ortaç-Tepe. Deniz, if you like, you can wave your hand to people. We have Steve Brown from the, again, University of Glasgow. And we have myself and Ayman from the University of Stirling. We also have researchers from the Pakistani context. So from Pakistan, we have Samina Rana from Higher Education Department, and we have Shabullah from University of Science and Technology. We have Malik Ajmal Gulzar from Allama Iqbal Open University. We also have colleagues and researchers from Turkey, particularly from Trabzon University. We have Servet Çelik and Bilal Karaca. So all together, we make the project team. You will hear from the project team throughout the presentation. So what are the research questions that we try to, find a response or respond within our project based on the aim that I have just mentioned? So we try to see the promotion and inclusion of inclusive and social justice-oriented pedagogies in language teacher education by focusing on three main stakeholders here, if you like, I can say. So these are teacher educators across the three contexts, and language teachers or learning teachers or student teachers across, again, the three contexts, and also the policy and pedagogy documents. So we try to look at those three components of the project to see to what extent the promotion and inclusion of or integration of inclusive and social justice-oriented pedagogies are possible, or to what extent they are performed or enacted. All right, based on these research questions, within our project, we have 6 different milestones. Those included an online transnational kickoff meeting, which we had in August 2024. So that was the initial step of our project where we had our project team coming together to make a start to the project. We talked about the bits and pieces of the details of the project to see how we're going to navigate that journey. Following that kick-off meeting, we moved on to the first step of our data collection. Basically, we tried to explore explore inclusive and social justice informed pedagogies in language teacher education by referring to the kind of insights and opinions of the language teachers and also the teacher educators. Teacher educators are very important at that point because I'm going to talk about that in a minute as well. So the next step for us was the online transnational colloquium. So we had the research team, as the research team, we came together during an online transnational colloquium where we had the space to discuss the initial outcomes or findings of the teacher educator interviews along with the language teachers. The primary motivation behind this initial discussion of the findings was to inform the next step of our project, which is the second milestone. So based on the outcomes or insights of the teacher educators and language teachers, we shaped our intervention process, basically our workshops. So that means we moved on to our fourth milestone, where we had in-person and online intervention and workshops. Completing the workshops, we moved on to the post-data collection stage. Again, we went back to our student teachers, we gave them some surveys and follow-up interviews to collect more insights. And the final milestone of our project is the online multiplier event that we're having now. All right, I'm going to leave the floor to Denise. She will continue with the theoretical framework of the study and also the methodology.
Thank you, Adnan. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So the theoretical background or the rationale for this project comes from this historical approach in English language teaching towards conventional and prescribed methodologies. So, when we look at how language teacher education programs and also the what happens in the language classroom, we see emphasis on content, and content here refers to vocabulary, grammar, language skills, pronunciation, and so on. So there is definitely emphasis over prescribed disciplinary content, methods, and strategies. Emphasis on lesson planning, execution, and emphasis on classroom management from a more conventional sense. And what we see as missing is limited attention, or what we see as missing is attention to the impact of social, cultural, and political ideologies on language use and the existing power dynamics in the classroom. So social justice language education, Adnan, could you, yeah, social justice language education, which this study actually is rooted in, aims to equip teachers with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to address the existing inequities and injustices, not only within schools, but also beyond schools, so reaching to communities and society. So social justice language education helps language teachers discuss issues around race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and as well as other, issues such as peace, environment, conflict, migration, and human rights. But while also, talking about these issues, the broader goal is to disrupt existing hierarchies and encourage learners to think critically, and the broader goal being educational and social change. So social justice language education is not a monolith. It's not one thing. It's not one framework, but it benefits from a wide range of theoretical frameworks as well as pedagogical approaches. And in our project, we benefited from feminist pedagogy, critical language awareness, critical applied linguistics, culturally responsive pedagogies, and anti-oppressive education. And what's at the core of social justice language education, because it's a holistic framework, drawing upon different frameworks, it's also based on this idea of intersectionality, that the many of the oppressions that we see, we observe, we experience in our lives are not single issues, but they interact and they intersect with each other. So so we're interested in, or social justice language education is interested in how, for instance, race and ethnicity interact with social class or with gender or with sexuality. So this idea of intersectionality was at the core of our project as well. So moving on to the methodology, and Adnan, sort of mentioned this as well. Our project was carried out across three different contexts, so Turkey, Pakistan, and Scotland. And in each context, we had teacher educators that we interviewed in the earlier stages, and we had learning teachers that we collected data and we worked with and we trained them. And we use the term learning teacher here in case this is a new term for you. It's more like a holistic term actually to refer to both pre-service and in-service educators. In our project, we had novice teachers, we had pre-service teachers, we had in-service teachers. So we had to pick a more holistic terminology to refer to this diverse group. So in Turkey, we had 19 learning teachers, in Pakistan, 23, and in Scotland, 24. So, so the data collection involved a pre-intervention stage. We also collected data during the intervention as well, and I'll talk about how, and then a post-intervention stage. So in the pre-intervention or pre-training stage, we interviewed the teacher educators. We also carried out a pre-survey and a pre-interview with the learning teachers. And these pre-surveys and pre-interviews with the learning teachers were repeated after the intervention. If you can change the slide, Adnan, to the next one. So after the during the intervention stage, we also collected data through their materials evaluations and lesson plans. And in addition to the interviews, surveys, and the workshop artifacts, we also looked at different policies, educational policies and language education policies in these three different contexts, and analyze those as well. And I believe you'll hear from the outcome of that analysis as well in this presentation. And in terms of data analysis, this was a mixed method approach. So we had quantitative data analyzed through descriptive statistics and qualitative data analysis in mathematic analysis, looking at both within case and across case analysis, and also doing Excel, open and Excel coding. So I'll now leave the floor to, sorry. To Sarvet to go over the first set of results.
Okay, thank you, Dennis, and everyone for being here, actually. I really appreciate it. I'll briefly present the key findings from teacher educator interviews we conducted in three contexts, Turkey, Pakistan, and Scotland. I'll try to explain how these findings actually directly informed the in-person and online workshops that we designed for learning teachers. So across all these three different contexts, teacher educators overall expressed a strong commitment to inclusion and social justice that was pretty visible actually in the data. This commitment wasn't abstract actually. It grew out of their personal values and their own experiences that they mentioned here and there, and their reflections on inequality in their own classrooms. You know, they had a wide variety of experiences that they shared with us. Across these settings, teacher educators described inclusive and socially just pedagogy as different practices that give their students maybe a sense of agency, invite them maybe to question, think critically, recognize and value diverse identities and voices, and also maybe build classroom environments that feel not only participatory but also democratic. You know, they viewed social justice not as a isolated topic per se, but as part of everyday teaching, especially when working with refugee learners, multilingual students, and those from a wide variety of marginalized social and economical backgrounds. Alongside this shared commitment, educators emphasized how essential it is to work from their local context. That was something important here. Educators across these different settings repeatedly, multiple times, stressed that context is the starting point for implementing socially just pedagogies. You know, this included adapting materials so they reflect local cultural and linguistic realities, sometimes using students' lived experiences as learning resources, challenging stereotypes, you know, a lot of the times in text, media, you know, incorporating multilingual and culturally relevant examples. In Turkey, for instance, educators described adjusting activities to include particularly Syrian refugee learners. In Pakistan, for instance, they highlighted the importance of validating different languages like Urdu, Pashto, and other linguistic repertoires of the students. And in Scotland, specifically, contextualization was discussed as being essential for helping learning teachers to see maybe how theory connects to their own communities. Across all these three sites, I would say contextualization was viewed as important for putting social justice into practice. So one strategy that came up constantly, you know, several times actually in the data across these countries was critical literacy. You know, teacher educators in all these three contexts relied so much on critical literacy as a practical way to address different issues related to injustices, you know, through real everyday classroom activities, you know, and that include a wide variety of things, but I would like to mention maybe a few, like examining how gender, ethnicity, and class are represented in text. That was one thing. Using multimodal materials, for instance, encouraging questions such as who is represented, who is not, who is missing, and why. For many educators, actually, in our data set, critical literacy offered a practical, concrete way to help learning teachers notice different biases, you know, preassumptions, challenging stereotypes maybe, and engage with discussions that are equity focused, you know, through language and literacy work. At the same time, of course, the educators were very clear about the barriers that they faced, so it wasn't also a straightforward journey. Despite their strong commitment, they they described significant barriers to implementing socially just practices in their own context. I mean, this, for instance, included rigid and overcrowded curricula, institutional attitudes sometimes that treat social justice as an invidiary term add-on, and various forms of cultural and political resistance, you know, and that was in one way expected. Many also noted things like inequalities affecting refugee, rural, or marginalized learners, and how they make socially just teaching both essential and challenging. Across these three settings, they stress individual effort wasn't enough. You know, they were talking about the people were, you know, having their own words, but individual effort to some extent it was good, but at some point we needed more than that. You know, without structural support, maybe time and institutional recognition, social just pedagogies as they stated, were difficult to sustain. These challenges overall shaped what educators saw as the most important directions for intervention. Teacher educators in these three contexts also offered we had so many suggestions, but very consistent suggestions for how interventions should be designed. First, for instance, they emphasized bringing theory and practice together. They asked for support in translating complex issues, maybe such as, as Dennis mentioned, intersectionality and equity, representation, and a wide variety of others, into concrete classroom pedagogies, maybe theoretically they were there, but they needed to be translated into concrete classroom pedagogies. They stressed the importance of starting from teachers' own lived realities and experiences, in their own words. Start where the teachers are, Second, they emphasized fostering a critical stance, not simply adding new techniques. And by that, we can say this included basically helping learning teachers engage with critical literacy, maybe analyze text through a social justice framework or lens, and reflect on their own positionality and biases. Third, educators highlighted the importance of validating multilingualism and treating students' linguistic repertoires as important as assets rather than obstacles. That was something important. This point came through especially strongly in Pakistan and Turkey. Overall, I would say their suggestions pointed toward contextualized, reflective, and practical support that enable teachers to enact social justice in a way that's meaningful, in a way that's pretty close to everyday ways. These suggestions, the overall suggestions, actually helped us with the design of our workshops. Our intervention workshops, both in-person and online ones, were designed directly around these findings of the interviews. On day one, for instance, we focused on social justice and socially just language education. We basically grounded participants in key concepts and gave them hands-on experience with critical textbook analysis, for instance, thanks to Steve, for instance, reflecting maybe the emphasis on critical literacy from the interviews, And on day two, we turned to notions such as intersectionality and inclusive pedagogies. And here we drew on the participants, the teacher educators' calls for contextualization, specifically multilingual approaches and reflexivity. Participants overall created lesson plans. The learning teachers created lesson plans that connected those theoretical ideas with their own context, and that helped align closely with the needs identified by teacher educators in the interviews. In short, I would say the workshop design closely reflected the insights, challenges, and priorities shared by the teacher educators in Turkey, Pakistan, and Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Servet and Denise. So it gets stuck, sorry. Yes. Now we will move on to the findings from learning teachers, basically student teachers. So we had data collection before and after the workshops. So let's first focus on the pre-workshop data. Across the three contexts, we have seen some converging patterns. And those included, for example, the participants, the learning teachers showed strong alignment and agreement with the principles and goals of inclusive and social justice-oriented pedagogies across the three contexts. However, they highlighted limited, prior education exposure and classroom experience to be able to implement those pedagogies in the classroom settings. Obviously, that limitation indicates a gap between motivation and capacity. Despite strong increased motivation, but there is this lack of the knowledge and the skills that they needed in terms of concrete strategies and the confidence, of course, along with it, and also models that they can draw on, to implement those pedagogies in the classroom setting. However, we have seen some varying starting points across the three contexts. So, for example, in Turkey, we have seen the participants, the learning teachers, had lowest baseline familiarity based on their self-report. They had also high conceptual ambiguity, which means that's why the workshops were kind of very useful in relation to building that, helping students to overcome that conceptual ambiguity. And they also raised concerns around cultural resistance, the refugee issues in Turkey, and also the gender norms as some of the main concerns that are structural and societal that could pose challenges for the implementation of those pedagogies. So basically, there was a need for foundational, knowledge and orientation towards those pedagogies, and also a need for low-risk practical examples which are tailored towards the context itself. From the Pakistani context, we have seen the participants had a moderate level of familiarity, with these pedagogies, and oftentimes their, familiarity came through their kind of social media, use, and also the workshops they participated in. But we have seen strong commitment, and yet, despite this structural, strong commitment, they also highlighted structural barriers to the integration of those pedagogies. So what do we mean by structural barriers? Basically, the kind of challenges and barriers in relation to norms within the society, the curriculum and access issues. So that means there are some needs that need to be responded. So these needs included the resources, institutional support, and also culturally relevant models that can be implemented in the context. When we look at the Scottish context, we have seen again the participants, the learning teachers, were somewhat familiar with these pedagogies, but again, they had limited formal education because oftentimes those pedagogies are treated as add-on in the curriculum. So they again had limited exposure or background in relation to those pedagogies. However, they believed in the value of those pedagogies in language learning and teaching. So just like the participants in Turkey and also in Pakistan, they also highlighted some needs, and these needs included concrete classroom models and practice-oriented professional development. So these were some of the needs, as you can see, highlighted by the learning teachers or student teachers. So, did I skip one? Yep, no, sorry. So we, that was the kind of findings from the pre-workshop. Then the students, the learning teachers went through some intervention, and after the intervention, we again had data collection. So that's basically our post-workshop data collection. Our analysis revealed some cross-context overlapping findings. So basically, the learning teachers highlighted structural barriers as the main reason or as the main challenge for the implementation of those pedagogies in the language classrooms. So those structural barriers included institutional resistance, curriculum rigidity, the expectations being overloaded, as Servet has also mentioned, the cultural and societal norms or expectations, and also lack of resources. And finally, they also highlighted the assessment pressures across the three contexts, which kind of impeded the implementation of those pedagogies. However, through the workshops, they have seen the transformative value of these, pedagogies. So they reported, increased knowledge of these pedagogies. They also reported, increased confidence and readiness to be able to implement those pedagogies in their classrooms, existing or current classrooms or potential future classrooms. So they also valued the practical tools, lesson planning, and reflections they carried out during the workshops. So they basically highlighted that those kind of practices should be part of the curriculum, the regular usual curriculum they're exposed to be able to feel empowered to bring those pedagogies into the classroom setting. So there were, of course, some contextual nuances. So in Turkey, for example, we have seen that the learning teachers have built a strong recognition of the systemic constraints or barriers like curriculum and the ministry as some of the kind of the expectations of those two, as some of the barriers to the implementation of those pedagogies. Yet they have seen the workshops as eye-opening, and they also highlighted that the need for ongoing institutional support, either at the university level or at the K-12 level to be able to bring those pedagogies into the classroom. In Pakistan, we have seen that the participants, have reported increased agency that's often coming through reflection and also planning concrete action. So, for example, the lesson planning and also reflective activities they carried out during the project helped them to build that agency. They also highlighted the need or an interest in collective action. So that means we need to take collective action to be able to bring those pedagogies into the classroom. So those collective initiatives or actions could include, for example, curriculum designing, having voice in the process of curriculum designing or curriculum making, publishing together on those pedagogies or issues, and advocacy as some of the kind of actions that are needed for those pedagogies to be implemented. And of course, the need for sustained professional development and community dialogue have been highlighted by the Pakistani participants as well. When we come to the Scottish context, we have seen again the expanded conceptual understanding, especially for many of our participants. For example, the concept of intersectionality was pretty new, something very novel. So they have, through the intervention, the workshops, they had the chance to improve that knowledge. They also have highlighted that small and yet there are small and yet meaningful entry points. So, for example, using an image, using reflections or the material selections might be some minor and yet meaningful steps towards the implementation of those pedagogies. And in relation to the implementation, they also noted that there should be gradual integration of those pedagogies, meaning if you bring those pedagogies, all of a sudden all together into the classroom, you might crash into some walls, so kind of gradual integration, incremental integration of those pedagogies would be very important to bring to hopefully create some sort of transformation and change within the classroom setting and in the larger community. So overarching synthesis of those findings tell us a lot of things. So the first thing that we can draw based on those findings is that, so we see that there is this strong motivation, but there is lack of capacity. So which means teacher education programs should focus on developing learning teachers' capacity to be able to bring those pedagogies into the classroom. So systemic barriers persist across all three contexts. So the institutional and cultural and societal expectations could be some of the challenges for the implementation of those pedagogies. And professional development has been seen as a measurable difference because it helps bridge the gap between theory and practice. It helps to build a teacher agency. It provides actionable strategies, and it also supports effective and sustained practices within the classroom as well in relation to those pedagogies. Both the teacher educators and also student teachers mention that context matters. Context is super important. So whatever we do in relation to those pedagogies within the classroom should be tailored, which means one size fits all professional development activities or actions will not respond to the contextual needs. So as you can see, in Turkey and Pakistan, Scotland, there are different expectations in relation to that. The last and final point in relation to the findings of the student teachers is that lasting change requires policy alignment, curriculum flexibility, resource allocation, and sustained and practice-oriented professional development, and building communities of practice that could support the implementation of those pedagogies. So these are the basic insights that I can share with you from the perspective of learning teachers. Now I'm going to leave the floor to Samina. She will continue with the policy analysis.
Well, thank you, Adnan. And first, let me know, am I audible and quite clear to everyone?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks. So building upon the analysis which has been presented by Dinesh, Adnan, and Sarwat, I now turn to cross-text analysis of the policy documents from Turkey, Pakistan, and UK. And these three systems, we know that they are united in rhetoric, but they're divided in clarity, commitment, and classroom realities. So for the analysis, our research question, I just want to restate our research question, and that was in fact we used to analyze during our analysis in what ways do current practices, policies, and curricula within language teacher education programs promote feminist, inclusive, and social justice-oriented pedagogies in Pakistan, and how can interventions be designed and implemented to further enhance integration of such pedagogies into practices, policies, and curricula, while also considering the differential impacts of these intervention based upon the gender. So we have considered this point of view, including all the three main contexts from the Turkey, Pakistan, and the UK. And just as I have related that these three systems, they are united, they are very much committed to present and work for the policies, for the feministic, for inclusive policies. But what is more important, that they are divided within their own context in terms of the clarity, their own commitment, and their own classroom realities, because they are altogether different from whatever that has been presented on the policy documents. So moving forward, I would like to focus on, in fact, next point, that is, in fact, what is more important, and focus on more structured, inclusive, and inclusion-aligned professional pathways in Turkey. And I would like to Adnan to please move on. Next slide. Okay, thank you. Yes. So what we have noticed that in terms of the language ideologies and equity, in Pakistan, English dominance restricts equitable access and marginalizes local languages. And during our analysis, we have learned that Scotland protects some heritage languages but overlooks many minority home languages. And if we talk about Turkey, Turkey ties linguistic inclusion to wider equality initiatives, to regional disparities, which in fact let's persist. And next, please. I would like to highlight that how different language policies across the three countries either support or they limit equitable access to these opportunities. Yes, thank you. And here, yes, as far as policy document the analysis is concerned, I must let everyone know that these are the most important documents, because most of our decisions and most important decisions countrywide, and especially in terms of the higher education departments, they in fact they adopt from the head, and they in fact they pay special contribution to the learning. But whatever we have noticed that either it's in fact our vision or our actual national educational policies or other policies, our English language policies, we notices that in terms of these political and social and economic realities, there are so many issues, and our policy enactment that has been shaped by local social and political economic realities. So what we actually need to do, what we in fact shift to in fact our contextual approach, and we need to include in fact these social and cultural realities into the study of the education. And there is an access to the inclusive education influenced by Turkey regional inequalities. And when we have analyzed the papers, we have learned that the implementation of our policy hindered by the instability and limited fundings in Pakistan. And if we talk about Scotland, the TESOL provision is shaped by the international recruitment priority in the Scotland. So this is one thing which is very important, the study of the TESOL. So here I would like to, in fact, emphasize that in Pakistan, especially if we talk about the political involvement and especially the way they had there in terms of funding, whenever they are going to present a policy document there that include sufficient, in fact, sufficient statements, and they have ideological background that they are going to include all the genders, and they really mean something inclusive. But one thing is that the policy documents, they are vague, and especially if we talk about these in fact regional inequalities, we notice that because many students in the Turkey context, they really have been influenced by the inclusive education, and because in different regions there was some inequalities which really persist there. And if we talk about the Scotland, so because the study of the Tisol is in Scotland, the Scottish language, there are some other languages, and Tisol, in fact, they provided that these should be in fact shaped by the international recruitment and should be prioritized. So, well, I think we should move to the next slide.
I'm on the next
Yes, please.
slide.
Okay, yes. Well, let me check what has happened. Thank you. So what is more important here? That policy analysis after our policy analysis document and cross policy analysis documents, that what we need is that our vision, our perception, our ideologies, and our documents, our vision that really need action. And policies need clear values and explicit expectations for practice. The need to be sustainable, and sustainable inclusion depends upon our systematic support, training, and resources. And we all know that, just as Adnan mentioned, that we need some structural and systematic approach and training as well, and especially resources, and successful implementation that must align with our local linguistic and social context, which is very important. So while the vision is clear, meaningful change depends upon actionable steps. And with that, I really would like to appreciate, and I would like to hand over to Steve to take this discussion forward. So it's over to Steve.
Thanks very much, Samina. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah,
Yes.
okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to try to offer some discussion, kind of bringing together the various different elements of this, of the project and the findings that we got from it. Obviously, as you can see, this was quite I guess, a big and kind of complex project, in as much as we had 3 different stakeholder groups that we were collecting data from, and across 3 different contexts as well. So I'll try to give a quick summary. First of all, looking at patterns that seem to be existing, or themes that we could identify across all the different countries. So first of all, there was this notion that transmission-based models of education and language teaching remain dominant. And that seems to be how most people regard, or that seems to be the dominant practice when it comes to language teaching. But in all 3 of the contexts, the participants identified a need for, and there was a demand for more guidance on how to incorporate inclusive and social justice oriented pedagogies. The interest in social justice and inclusive and social justice oriented pedagogies in language teaching stems primarily from a general kind of understanding of injustices in society, rather than any kind of formal learning that's taken place. But that's still significant, you know. The participants still identify a need and see a value in taking a social justice oriented approach to language teaching. And then another theme that was common across all of the countries was that institutional and cultural barriers exist as concerns, and they were concerns for our learning teachers before the workshops, and they continued to be concerns after the workshops. So despite our focus on practice and on kind of practical ideas, after the workshops, a lot of our learning teachers were still saying, Yeah, but it might still be tricky for me to implement this in my context. Can we have the next slide? Right, so if we look at issues that emerged from each of the different contexts, if we start with Turkey, the learning teachers, there was a shift in terms of their perceptions as a result of the workshop. Rather than simply seeing English teaching as a form of language transmission, the workshops seemed to have an impact in terms of changing their perception and allowing them to regard English and the English language learning process as a kind of social and cultural mediation, rather than simply a kind of unidirectional transmission. There was a sense that implementation would be difficult. Certain topics were seen as sensitive within the Turkish context, and could be quite kind of restrictive, and that might pose challenges in terms of the implementation of inclusive and social justice oriented pedagogies. Nevertheless, the teacher educators valued the whole idea of social justice oriented pedagogies, but their concern was that at institutional level and in terms of the space within the curriculum that they have, flexibility in terms of the resources at their disposal, these things were limiting their capacities to really focus on and implement inclusive and social justice oriented pedagogies. With regard to policy in Turkey, there's a lot of mention of inclusion, but not so much in terms of the actual operational guidance for how to actually implement it. Generally speaking, if progress is made, or if any good work is done with regard to inclusive and social justice oriented pedagogies, it tends to be as a result of the individual efforts of certain people, academics, teacher educators, etc., rather than thanks to the actual system that is in place. So if we look at Pakistan, discussion of the key issues coming out of there, there is again a kind of endorsement of social justice oriented pedagogies, but concerns or fears even of resistance from an institutional level and also a kind of social level in terms of some of the topics being potentially quite difficult to raise or discuss, certainly from a transformative perspective, within the educational context. The teacher educators who were engaging with social justice themes tended to rely on their own personal scholarship or activism rather than anything that was being recommended to them or encouraged of them from a systemic kind of perspective. There was a perception that the curriculum can be very rigid and there's very little flexibility, which is a limitation, a limiting factor, and also issues about societal norms limiting the capacity to take a meaningfully social justice oriented approach. Policy, again, there was a lot of rhetorical promotion of equity, a lot of rhetoric that kind of talks about equity and inclusion. However, at the same time as all of that rhetoric, there is a privileging of English, which is at the expense of other local languages. And generally speaking, there seems to be a gap between what the policy claims is happening and what is actually going on in the classroom. And this kind of issue with a gap between policy discourse and policy implementation or classroom reality is something that we kind of could see in all three of the countries. Okay, so if we look at Scotland, brief summary. Once again, there's this disconnect between what is promoted through the policy discourse, lots of discussion of inclusion, but very little in the way of actual guidance in terms of how inclusion can be achieved, and also very little in the way of funding. And there was a lack of coherence. There are some conflicting policies in the Scottish educational context that pose limitations. And with regard to that, there are certain issues within the Scottish education system that are driven, or certain policies and practices that are driven by a kind of neoliberal ideology, both with regard to the teaching of ESOL to adults, especially in the college sector, and to TESOL programs, which are mostly delivered at universities. These institutions tend to operate along kind of neoliberal lines where the curriculum is kind of commodified. There's a focus on generating income through international students, and a focus on developing employability skills and things like that. So these things can distract from a focus on social justice. In some contexts, especially in TESOL teacher education contexts, inclusive and social justice pedagogies tend to appear as a kind of add-on. They're not particularly clearly integrated or embedded across all elements of the TESOL curriculum. And instead, there are a number of contexts that were researched where social justice is kind of taught as there's like a separate module or something on social justice. The learning teachers, when they were attending the workshops, they saw social justice as relevant, but found it difficult to connect to prescribed curricula, to English language teaching curricula that they were familiar with. And it should be sort of borne in mind maybe that a lot of the learning teachers that attended the workshops in Scotland are not based in, they were doing their master's programs, and they were maybe in-service teachers, but most of them were international students whose intention was to return to their own country. So they were looking at social justice while being in Scotland, but with a view to their future practice being elsewhere. Okay, so talking about the workshops and the impact that they had, clearly there is a need expressed by the participants of our research. There's a need for guidance on how to integrate and how to implement inclusive and social justice oriented pedagogies. And the workshops addressed that need to some extent. There was a strengthening of the conceptual understanding. The learning teachers who attended the workshops expressed a clearer understanding of the concepts, and also an increased confidence and a sense of agency in terms of how to implement social justice oriented pedagogies. This I think is probably largely to do with the practical focus of the workshop, and the fact that it focused on how to take practical, how to look at practical elements of teaching, such as lesson planning, materials development or materials adaptation, and individual classroom activities as well. And the workshops also provided kind of supportive, safe spaces that allowed for reflection and dialogue and shared professional purpose. I think it was a useful exercise for the participants to engage with each other and to engage with us, but to see themselves as part of a professional network of people who have an interest and a concern in implementing inclusive and social justice oriented pedagogies. So I'm going to move on to our recommendations. So we have a number of recommendations that have kind of emerged from our findings. At institutional level and at policy level, we think it's important for clear practical guidance to be provided. There's a clear desire for some practical guidance rather than policy rhetoric, which can sometimes be quite vague. Actual practical guidance on how to apply inclusive and social justice oriented pedagogies within specific learning contexts. We would recommend the allocation of resources to allow for materials to be developed for training at pre-service and in-service levels to go on, and something, because of the contextualized nature of social justice education, flexibility within the curriculum is required, and that's not the case currently in a number of different contexts that we looked at. We recommend opportunities are provided for local adaptation of the curriculum, local adaptation of content, flexibility for teachers to develop their own materials or to co-create materials with their students, rather than simply a top-down prescriptive syllabus or prescriptive curriculum that allows very little flexibility. One way of facilitating this would be to perhaps reduce the exam-driven pressure, the kind of focus on teaching to the test. And this could be done by including more reflective assessments or project-based assessments that students could be working on over a period of time, and it kind of reduces the high stakes, pressurized nature of assessment. So I guess what I've just described there includes what should happen at curriculum level as well. So I talked about that as being something that should happen at institutional level and at policy level, but these things also affect the way that the curriculum should operate. In terms of teacher education and continuing professional development, we recommend ongoing structured development rather than just one-off sessions, rather than just having social justice being a focus for something that goes on kind of as an add-on or something a little bit extra. It would be good if teacher educators and people involved in CPD are engaging in a more integrated approach to social justice. So finding ways to bring it in at all stages and structuring it, embedding it. Rather than it simply being something that's discussed at a conceptual level, we see a real value in focusing on practical strategies of how to implement social justice oriented pedagogies actually in the classroom. And a key focus of teacher education and CPD should be to strengthen teacher agency as curriculum designers and as reflective practitioners. Reflective practice is a very important feature of social justice education, because teachers need to be able to reflect critically in order to work through the cycle of reflection and then identify where to go next. But this requires a considerable amount of agency, and agency, I think, is also a really important word when it comes to curriculum design or materials development. A lot of English language teaching contexts, there are a lot of English language teaching contexts where teachers are kind of reliant on a textbook or on a pre-existing set of materials that they are expected to follow, and that's what they're expected to do. Whereas if they were to develop skills in becoming more skilled as curriculum designers themselves, this would obviously increase their capacities to take a more social justice oriented, co-created approach to curriculum design and development. And also something that we felt was very valuable within the workshops was the collaborative space that was created within those workshops. And teacher educators and people involved in CPD could be considering how that can be done more in order to allow teachers to share challenges and also offer solutions to each other. And that is our presentation. So thank you very much. I think we have 2 pages worth of references for this presentation. We've got even more for the actual project.
Yeah.
So thank you all very much.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to open up for questions. Is that right?
Absolutely. So before moving on to the question and answer, if you want to connect with us later on, or if you have questions, for each contact, we have a key contact person. So you can email us, and here you see the QR code for our project website. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of resources available on the website, like reflections on textbook analysis or analysis of textbooks, and also lesson plans, like scholarly readings. They're all available under resources. Please feel free to visit our website. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we're going to open the space for questions and answers, any comments. If you're not able to speak, you can put your questions into the chat as well. I'll keep an eye on the chat too.
Could I ask a question, since no one's...
Yes, please.
So, first of all, thanks very much. That was really, really, really fascinating. Like I put in the chat, I'm writing a paper on this at the moment. It's providing a lot of input for me, lots of things to say. My question is, I come from kind of outside this area. It seems to me, if you don't take this the wrong way, but it seems to me if you ask teachers, you're setting up the workshops, etc., whether they think this is a good thing, they will say yes. They're almost bound to. So I just wondered if you're going to go back to them later to try and work out to what extent they've really taken this stuff on board. What other kind of measures have you got to try and, look into this?
That's a very good question, to be able to see the sustained impact of the project,
Yes.
right? The intervention, absolutely. So indeed, in our study, that's a research-based study. So in our ethics, we haven't included an item where we would go back to the participants to get further ideas or insights from them to see whether they have implemented, or is it at all possible for them to bring those things into their classrooms. However, as an add-on to what we have been doing, that's easily to be done because we already have the ethics. We just want to follow up. I believe that's possible. So we can continue with that. Maybe not with this project, but with our previous projects, again, which focused on social justice, we have done that, but not within that project yet, because we have just recently finished the project. But with the team, we need to discuss if we want to continue this, to see the sustained impact of those interventions or whatever has been covered during the intervention. That's a very good question. Thank you for that.
Thanks a lot. Just one other small point. I think if you want to see sustained progress, judging from what you've said, everything that's been said today, you need to persuade the people who are creating the teacher education syllabus itself to kind of bring it all into there, because it's very difficult to get teachers to do this without having the training in the first place. But I'm sure you're aware of that.
Oh, absolutely. That's why we included the perspectives of teacher educators to shape the intervention process. So as my colleagues have mentioned, indeed, we had the theory and practice-oriented workshops, and these were not decided by ourselves, but this came from the teacher educators, because they are aware of what is happening within their context. I'm now, for example, teaching in the UK context. I know what is happening, especially, not fully for sure, what is happening in TESOL programs, where there is space for the implementation of those pedagogies, if it is possible at all or not. But to be able to do that, I guess we need more collective action. I guess that has been mentioned by both the teacher educators and also the learning teachers in our study. Collective action is the key, I guess, here. In relation to your question in the chat, we have submitted our final report to the British Council. We
Oh,
have
cool.
revised it. Yes, we're hoping that it's gonna be finalized very soon, and we're going to make it available on our project website. And I believe British Council will send out an email to people as if you're, for example, a member of BAL. But if
Yeah,
not, even our website would be a resource for you to access the final report.
marvelous.
I
I
just
have a
have this.
question, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, Misha. Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all of these really insightful findings, like so important. And I think it's clear from these findings that like action is now needed. Like we don't need to find out any more about like what all of the issues are surrounding injustices, but we need to kind of take more action.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, like, if you have like plans for the future now to like how you're going to disseminate all of this knowledge that you've got.
Yeah.
Are
That's
you
it.
going to be expanding like the workshop outreach? Like, do you have plans for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just recently we were in touch with the team, and then an email came from Denise to all of us asking, like how we can, get in touch with the stakeholders, especially like, those people who make the policy documents and curriculum, curriculum making. So as our next step within each context, our purpose is to reach out to stakeholders. Those could be, again, the policymakers, especially people who have the power, to disseminate our, findings to share our findings with them, and then to see their reflections and insights, and then how we can action those things, more at the, implementation level rather than leaving them at very abstract level. Yes, that's on the plate. And within the UK context, I don't know if you're familiar with that, research excellence framework is super important. So which means the impact of any project should not just stay, oh, we have made that publication, etc. It should touch the society.